In this video, Dr. Jordan Peterson explains what it means to be a good parent and how it impacts the world.
So we're calling someone a good person, and so what does it mean? Well, we're going to do a bit of a microanalysis. We'll assume that it's a shorthand, low-resolution representation of the person, and that you can decompose it. So if someone says X is Henry is a good person, and maybe he's 45, you might say, does he have children? And then you say yes. And then you might say, well, is he a good parent? Because you might assume that if he's a good person, he would be a good parent. Now, it's conceivable that he could be a good parent, a good person without being a good parent, if he was good at like 5 other important things. But let's assume that as a good person, he's also a good parent. I think it's reasonable to assume that good parent would be a subset of good person, right? Because it's more specific. More specific means it covers less time and space in some sense. Because good person is a description of a person that covers how the person interacts with the world across the broadest possible amount of time and location. And then good parent is, well, you find that out when they're interacting with children, let's say, for the sake of argument. There's other issues. And then you might say, well, if he's good parent, well, what does he have to do to be a good parent? You might say, well, he has to feed his children, so he probably needs a job, and it would be better if it was a good job, so he's got a good job, and that's part of being a good person. And then maybe he can care for his family. And so care might be regarded as a more specific subset of good parent. And so you can decompose care into, let's say, play with baby. And then you can decompose play into, well, I decomposed it into peek, tickle, and clean. And then what's interesting about this is that those are all abstractions. But once you get down to a high enough level of resolution, they're no longer abstractions, in that they're actually actions that you undertake in the world. Moving your hand is not an abstraction. So at some point, and this is a nice elegant solution to the mind-body problem to some degree, at some level of resolution, high resolution, it stops being conceptual and starts being action. And that's where the mind hits the world. And then like if you go into an even higher level of resolution than that, like what do you have to do in order to move your hand, the answer to that is you don't know. You just do it. And so your consciousness bottoms out in some sense at the level of voluntary motor activity. So there's a level above which you can't perceive, which are the networks that you're involved in, and there's a level below which you can't perceive, which is, under normal circumstances, perceive or control, which is whatever enables you to actually move. So, all right, so then you might say, well, what are all of these things? Like, how would you conceptualize, I decomposed good person. But then you might say, well, what are all these things made out of? In a sense, what are their constituent elements? Good person, good parent, family care, play with baby. They're sort of like games, they're sort of like stories, they're sort of like rituals. I talked to you last week about the fact that the Russian neuropsychologists, for example, felt that people had to build models of the world. And so you could call this a model of the world. And so the reason they suspected that was because if you brought someone, I think I ran through this, if you bring someone into a laboratory and you play them a tone, when they first hear the tone, they manifest an orienting reflex, which is a change in skin conductance, and that's actually a consequence of neurological activity. And then if you play the tone a bunch, they stop having that reaction, and then if you vary the tone on any perceptible dimension, the orienting reflex returns. And so the inference from that was, well, obviously, the person must be constructing a model of the tone, because otherwise how would they know if something deviated from it, especially on all those dimensions? So not only is it a model, it's a multi-dimensional model. Okay, now, the upshot of that was that for a long time people tried to figure out how in the world we modeled the world, and then they also tried to make smart machines that modeled the world, that could then plan their actions in the modeled world and then could act in the world as a consequence. And they got nowhere with that, because it turned out that the world is so damn complex that if you're going to model it, you're going to spend all your time modeling, you're not going to spend any time acting in it, and you're not going to get anywhere. And it's partly because the world is almost infinitely complex. And so if you're trying to get a computer to look at the world, you might say, well, what is the computer supposed to look at? Everything. Well, no. I mean, you look at a lot in some ways and not very much in others, and half your brain is dedicated, roughly speaking, to visual processing, and then you've got your other senses to help you figure out what's going on. But you don't build a model of the whole world. You don't build any model at all of the parts of the world that aren't relevant to you. So for example, your model of this floor is very low resolution. If I took you guys out in the hallway, assuming the hallway floor isn't the same color, and I said, what was the color of this floor? You would not be able to tell me. And the reason for that is, who cares? It could be shifting color all the time while you're sitting here, you know, subtly, and you're not going to care. And the reason for that is you're not falling through it, and it isn't moving. And so it's like an invisible presupposition of your current knowledge structure. And there's all sorts of things going on around you that are like that. You don't pay attention to the walls. You really don't pay attention to the people that are around you. You know, they could sort themselves in a different way. You wouldn't notice unless you know the person. There's all sorts of things that you don't model.
Thanks for watching.